Welcome, and thank you for joining today's conference, Regional Issues Forum. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. You can submit questions throughout the presentation to all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel. All audio lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will give you instructions on how to ask a question at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to Vijay Satayal, Regional Issues Forum Chair. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to the first RIF meeting for 2023. And it is a special RIF meeting for many reasons. First of all, let me back up. Vijay Satyal with Western Resource Advocates. I'm the public interest subsector representation into the RIF with my colleague Jamie Stomatson, who's the consumer advocate sector RIF representation. My RIF colleagues all join me in welcoming you all to this meeting, and I have some good news to share. My big good news is I'm the outgoing chair after this meeting. So I look forward to having Josh Walter and Meg McNall take over, and we will work well together as I take over a new role called the RIF Secretary to help us keep up and engage with you all. I want to clarify one thing about the RIF for many of you who may be new to this call. If you are new and not been on a RIF call before or a meeting, the RIF fundamentally was designed as part of the EIM evolution to be a forum for stakeholders to learn about the EIM, the governing body, and any ISO developments that take place. In my follow-up agenda item later, we will talk a bit about what we have done last year and what I observed from my experience as a chair. And I cannot wait but be excited for some of the work we'll be doing this year as well. Can we have the agenda, please? Unless my screen is mistaken here. If Silas, we can have the agenda visible on the screen, or should I be doing it? I can do it.
Absolutely, I'm pulling up the agenda now.
Thank you. So I just want to quickly walk through the agenda. Basically, if you see the agenda on the website, you will see that I want to introduce very quickly. I would like all the RIF liaisons. No, this is my presentation, which comes a little later. But I think just the main meeting agenda. Basically, I would like to go through quick introductions of my RIF liaison colleagues and then introduce member Anita Decker, and she can explain best her role with the RIF. So while Silas gets the meeting agenda on the screen, I'll let everybody take over on the RIF side and introduce yourselves, please. Why don't we just go with Josh, then Meg, and then let's just try to hit this. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Vijay. Hi, I am Josh Walter. I work at Seattle City Light and am one of the two EIM entity sector liaisons. I'll hand it off to Meg.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Meg McNall with the law firm of Thompson Coburn. I represent the Six Cities Group, and I am a liaison from the California PTO sector.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Ian.
Hello, Ian White here. I am one of two sector liaisons for the IPP and marketer sectors. My other colleague is Kathleen Colbert with Vistra, and I work for Shell Energy North America. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's go to Jamie, please.
Hello, I'm Jamie Stamson, and I am the Consumer Advocate Subsector Representative for the PIO Consumer Advocate Sector.
Thanks, Jamie. Lauren, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Lauren Tenney-Dennison. I work for the Public Power Council and am one of the liaisons for the consumer-owned utility sector.
Lindsay, please.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Schleckaway for NV Energy, and I'm one of the liaisons for the EIM entity sector.
Thank you. Doug Balcioni, I hope you're on.
Hi, I'm Doug Bochignone. I'm with Flynn Resource Consultants, and I'm also a consumer-owned utility sector liaison.
Thank you, Doug. I'll keep working on getting your last name right. Alex?
Okay, yes, everybody. My name is Alex Spain. I work with the Bonneville Power Administration. I am the one and only sector liaison for the Federal Power Marketing Administrations. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Matt? I think Matt's not on. Matt Lacar is, if I'm correct, is also with the EIM entity with Lindsay, unless I'm mistaken, or on the transmission sector. I'm not getting my basics here. Did I miss any of my RIF colleagues? I know Kathleen got proxy RSVP through EN. Anybody else we're missing, please? Okay, that's perfect. Welcome and congratulations to member Anita Decker. I would like Anita, please introduce yourself to the larger RIF community and your role as you engage with us, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item, please.
All right. Excuse me. Thank you, Vijay. So it's good to be here. This is my second call now as the RIF liaison with the governing body. And recall that the RIF is a governance function of the WEIM. So if there wasn't a WEIM, we would not have a RIF. So it's really in our deliberations, we thought we really need to strengthen the relationship with the RIF. And we have a liaison role with the Board of State Regulators, so with the BOSSR, and we thought we really should do something similar with the RIF. So I am the liaison, and the way we have kind of positioned this is as we go through our officers, the past chair will be the liaison going forward. So you'll have me at least through June. And so it doesn't mean that other governing bodies will not attend. And so there are probably a couple other governing body members potentially on the call today. And so you can still reach out to any of us. We will still reach out to you. But this is just a formal, so I can go back and talk to the governing body about things that came up and questions or kind of how things are going with the RIF. So it's really important that there's a few aspects to that. And so as you guys strengthen the RIF activities going forward, a couple things, and that's we do expect that the RIF will continue to work primarily in the stakeholder process with the ISO. So it's really important that comments, either individually or as RIF sectors or as the RIF, really make their way into the stakeholder process. And then to the degree that the RIF sector has concerns or consensus and comments, those are really helpful to the governing body. So, we're looking forward to seeing that occur this next year, similar as we saw the comments on the GRC that were, kind of high level, but that's okay. It gives us a sense of where are members of the RIF kind of what directionally. And it's not that you all have to agree. It's not that we're looking for consensus on every issue, but it's important when we can see consensus around something that you support, or consensus around something that maybe needs some more work. To the degree that there's something that the RIF has had a discussion on that is not going the direction you would like, there is a big issue of timeliness. And telling us like when we're there to make a decision is probably not timely enough. So we are looking to hear from you whenever you feel it's appropriate. Probably not at the meeting where a decision is going to be made. I mean, we want to hear from you then, but if there's an issue, we're hoping we would hear about it sooner than that. And lastly, I know the RIF does a lot around education, and I look forward to participating in some of that and as you guys continue with that. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. And again, my door is always open. I will speak for the other governing body members. I know their doors are always open. So we just want to make sure we've got a good flow of communication. And the liaison is just kind of a formal point of contact, if you will. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you, Member Decker. I really appreciate these thoughts. And we really want to thank you. I think the RIF liaisons will join me in supporting that. You've shown a very explicit commitment to engage with the RIF even when you were the chair. And after you stepped down from that, your term ended, you've shown a consistent commitment to learn and understand the RIF and how that relationship will work well. So I think this is a valuable opportunity for us. And as my thoughts I will convey soon will share. we'll try to honor and use this liaison role to its fullest. So I hope we can make use of this resource and your time you're giving. Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item, and we're doing well on time. So welcome again to those who joined the first public RIF meeting for 2023. I want to acknowledge something and confess to CalISO CEO Elliot Mainzer and Chair Kanzioka that I did not want to go first up in the agenda, but my RIF colleagues insisted that I go before you all. So I apologize that you have to tolerate and wait through some thoughts I have. But I thought I should, as I'm the outgoing chair, which has been a wonderful experience. I've learned a lot in 1 year already. I thought I knew the RIF even way before I joined WI and before Jennifer Gardner brought me in, supported my desire to keep up with the RIF. I used to engage on the RIF through my time at WEC, where I was a senior policy advisor for 4.5 years, and I learned a lot about market structure and evolution through the RIF. So now that I suddenly turned into a role of a chair a year and a half ago, and Pam Sporberg really roped me in and kept nonstop lobbying, I was very hesitant to take on the role for the very reasons I'm going to highlight. And those very reasons have become the very fun opportunities. So this is what I've come up with. I spent 10 days thinking what to say and how to say, and I went through all the RIF public meetings in the last 2 years. And I have some very candid and very genuine thoughts to share for the benefit of everybody. But this is more an open message for the RIF community. So next slide, please. Thank you for moving my slides. My main focus is what did we learn, a comment about the liaisons, and then what are the opportunities ahead for the RIF. I want to first tackle the second bullet, which is liaisons. You have all been very engaging. 89 to 90% of the liaisons are new. They're a whole new cohort that joined because a good bunch of the existing RIF liaisons moved on into the GRC or other roles. So it was learning from the fire hose experience, and a couple of the veterans like Matt Lacar and others it was helpful to have 1 or 2 people in the RIF who knew how things worked in the past and what we need to be mindful of and what the processes were. And I spent enough time reading the operating guidelines myself back and forth, but we could not be doing our work without CalISO staff. A very big outright kudos to Holly Taylor, who's been explicitly and deeply engaged in keeping up with us. And I just want to share my one observation to liaisons that we need the CalISO staff helping us brainstorm or give us input, but we definitely are independent, and I hope we don't lose our independence, but also with independence comes accountability for being independent. We just can't go out swinging with what we think we want to do. So I just want to clarify that, and I'll come back to that later. The opportunities ahead, I specifically want to call out the R, the I, and the F, and I'll get to that. Next slide, please. I want to first commend the liaisons. Everybody dived in early 2022. If you remember, we had Member Prescott and Member Decker, and I don't remember one more EIM governing body member, met with us early January of 2022 and shared what they're looking for with the RIF, gave us ideas and concerns. And starting in January, these are all the topics we have hit. So a big pat on the back to my colleagues who brainstormed, come up with ideas. We even developed a prioritization of the RIF topics that all the sectors feel are important. We had to go through an informal consensus of agreeing what topics we can put up. And many of the topics included latest challenges the CalISO is facing and bringing in CalISO staff when needed. The second bullet, the fifth bullet, and the last bullet, second last bullet are examples where CalISO staff has presented or engaged us. We had a fascinating November 8th public meeting on the heels of the symposium, where there was a really cool discussion on RA program between California process versus the RAP. And I like to call this actual 20th to 21st century change in the transmission rights business in CalISO, which Doug helped facilitate. I thought that was pretty cool to hear and learn. So for those who are new to RIF, or for those who are keen to engage in your sectors with our liaisons who are on this call, please see the list of work we've done. So I'm kind of feel like I'm reporting a performance homework card. So for all that we've got done, A lot of emails go back and forth behind this. A lot of debates happen. And my one request to all the liaisons will be to try to please represent your sector, not just your entity or company you affiliate with. That was my big goal to myself. I did not push hard on WRA initiatives or public interest organizations' goals. I had to be mindful of my role as a chair and step out of the chair hat only when needed. So, of course, an implicit thought process for Josh to keep in mind, but for all the liaisons as well. Next slide, please. So, you know, when I look back at the GRC proposal that got approved last week, and I congratulate the EIM governing body in partnering with the CalISO Board of Governors in approving the EIM proposal, which is a milestone in the West, very appreciated. I noticed RIF came up a couple of times, but I went back and reviewed the GRC presentation that the GRC approved. And I came up with this bubble map. I'm a Venn diagram fan. So I came up with this Venn diagram where there is a side of the RIF that does not want to lose what we were used to doing is educational, like Member Decker said at the beginning also. So we don't want to lose our original scope or goals, but we also want to inform explicitly the CalISO roadmap process, which I've got a lot of interesting feedback and learning a lot about it in different ways. So there's an educational component on the left side to inform the CalISO process, not to lose our scope, but we also on the top right want feedback from the sectors constantly. So for those who want the RIF to be effective, and our liaisons, I challenge us all, including myself, we need to go back and engage our sectors actively and bring feedback. The more we bring feedback to the larger RIF dialogue, we can be productive and useful, but also agile. And to the bottom right is the more exciting world that we are now being empowered with is to deliberate trending issues. But as Member Decker also said in her comments, how can we know when it is not too late? This is something the liaisons are struggling with a lot, is when do we get involved and where, how, and in what way? So those are three things that come to my mind. And I mean this very frankly, Alex, Doug, Lindsay, Lauren, I can go down the whole list, Josh, Meg. I reviewed over 80 emails in the last 6 months of RIF liaisons dialogue and debate. And this is a consistent problem we have been capturing and dealing with is how and where to engage. So I ask us to think a lot about it as we move into our new role. Next slide, please. So I'll move fast from here on. These are my observations. We need to maintain our regionality. That's the R in the RIF. We have to learn to keep working together well, but this seesaw I really liked where you can have a couple of people having a lot more impact or influence and the others are being lopsidedly down. How can we manage that? I also request the RIF community to think about balance of content. There are people who are joining the markets new, who don't know all the terms, who don't really fully know what HASP means as an acronym. And there are some who are deep into it. So we need to think about our RIF meetings to be a balance of education and also going deep into the deep dives. Like I know some of my colleagues are super good at, Kathleen and Ian, and especially Lindsay or others, but we need to balance that because that was something I observed in the last 2 years. And prioritize with reason. If we throw something out for a RIF meeting, we should keep in mind if we should bring it back later. Next slide, please. The other important thing I would like to bring up is I'm very big about the ocean, and I think it's a very the ocean is the best example where weather can change on you very quickly and issues can come up at you very quickly as well. So on one hand, we want to maintain our educational focus, which is the lighthouse, shining light on issues and educating. I also believe in analogies and visual thinking. So I don't know if any of you have been on a tugboat. I have been on a tugboat. And the tugboat could be the RIF that brings a very complex issue out in the open and breaks it up, opens it up, or gets the issue out so it can build its own momentum and work on things. But when you do a deep dive on an issue to the far right that we've talked about, doing deep dives, I hope there are multiple people part of the deep dive, not a one sector perspective only. Deep dive should bring in the multiple sectors. So in other words, I urge the entire RIF community to think about the issues being educational or trending or foundational, or it's dormant but needs to be picked up. That's the way I try to classify the issues. Next slide, please. And finally, I hope we can balance empowerment with thoughtfulness. We've been given a new role. We've been given a lot of authority. The governing body keeps asking RIF to be engaged in every possible way. So if we're given this new king, queen, throne role, how do we leverage it well to respect divergence of views? Understanding if some sector has not ever spoken up, let them speak or let them share their views, even if they may be trivial. If some sectors don't own transmission, but it matters to them how it is used, let's hear about it. It's an open challenge I have even to the governing body and CalISO staff is you also coming to us proactively. It's not just all on us. We have to work together. So flagging to us earlier on if you think issues could deserve RIF engagement to please tell us as well. Life is a two-way street, and I hope we can build on the RIF and make it very effective. So that's it from me. Thank you for hearing from me, and I want to thank my colleagues for tolerating me as a chair for one full year. It has been a very, very enriching and powerful experience. Thank you. Okay. If anybody wants to reach me, my email address is here, and I'm also grateful to WRA for letting me give my time to the RIF this last year. It's been serious commitment, and it's been, as I said, enriching. Thank you. Silas, thank you. We can go back to the main agenda, and please, thank you. I hope no one has any questions of my thoughts, but if you have any clarifying questions of me, the RIF liaisons, we can take it up in a coordination call, and you can hold me accountable there. Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next agenda item and welcome the leadership. Well, actually, this is my time to give the baton. Welcome to Josh Walter and Meg McNall. Officially, we don't really have any coronation process, unfortunately, or any big rules of the game. So technically, I will yield my role as chair to Josh to take over the agenda. And congratulations to you and Meg on being the new chair and vice chair. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Vijay. Thank you. Thanks for your observations and remarks and for your service over the course of the last year. It's been great having you kind of lead the group and lead us through the changes that that we've seen that have come both organically and come from the GRC. So you and your work are very much appreciated coming from me and the liaisons. I don't really have any other kind of remarks other than, really maybe focusing on a couple of the aspects that you've already brought up. I think that the RIF has some great opportunity this year and on an ongoing basis to continue with the educational aspects of that we originally kind of have worked under, then coupled with the sector engagement issue that you also brought up, while also under our new role, providing a higher level of utility and helpfulness to the governing body in their decisional capacity. So I think that latter part is something that we really will be working on in growing into throughout the year in hopefully providing additional insight and assistance from a decisional capacity with the governing body. Maybe really quick, hand it off to Meg with any sort of additional remarks.
Thanks, Josh. No, I would echo what you just expressed with respect to what we've got coming up this year under your leadership. This is an exciting time in the ISO. We saw a number of extremely important changes authorized last week at the board and governing body meetings, and I think that's going to leave the RIF with a lot to talk about and a number of areas to really focus on. And I look forward to collaborating with all of my colleagues among the liaison group and among stakeholders to tackle those issues.
Thank you, Meg. And with that, let me hand over the next portion of the meeting, which is maybe less opening. Sorry, Elliot, but midpoint remarks in coming from you. We are looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Josh. And boy, it's great to be with all of you. It's great to see that the handing of the torch. So VJ, congrats, and thanks for your service to the RIF. Whatever photograph of the last slide in your presentation, wherever that was, I want to go there. That looked absolutely beautiful. And just know you've had a really nice impact. And Josh and Meg, thank you guys for taking over as chair and vice chair. I know it's a time commitment. Into the other sector liaisons, Lindsay and Matt and Jamie, Lauren, Doug, Kathleen, Ian, Alex. Thank you guys for logging the time. I know you've all got a lot on your plates. It's a big difference. And Anita, thank you too for stepping in that role as a liaison. I know that's important, and you clearly bring, a lot of passion and commitment to the issues. So, I haven't had a chance to spend too much time with the RIF over the years. I've kind of regretted that, to tell you the truth. I've always kind of wanted to get a little bit more exposure. I joined you, a couple months ago, but I know it's just been a super valuable forum and just a great opportunity for dialogue on the issues. I know my staff that have had a chance to participate have always appreciated it. And I know with your guys now sort of taking a little bit more active role of engaging in our stakeholder processes, I think that's going to be super helpful, and we're really looking forward to that. And I know, these are challenging issues, but just having been able to come together with a consensus proposal around the GRC, that was great. So glad to know you guys are working well as a team and listening to each other, and that's really critical. So really excited for this next chapter this year, and see you guys continue to strengthen your voice and the collaboration. Yeah, as Meg mentioned, look, we're all kind of coming off of what was, I think just a super positive week last week. And for those of you, that was the first time we'd actually had a board and certainly new joint session at headquarters in 3 years. So it was fabulous to see a few people in person. That's kind of nice, to get a chance to see some faces. And look, we were obviously deeply appreciative of the level of support that came in for EDAM, the governor's proposal, and even, the wheel-throughs issue, super tough, but, those three were approved. But I think equally importantly, I think also still a recognition that, there's work to do. And we heard other voices, that there were some, read every single comment letter that came in, including our friends, at NV and APS and Tucson and SRP. We take that equally important. The input from everybody matters, and we recognize, even as we now move into the next phase on implementation, and we move into a stage of having to go test this design, and we're going to continue to make refinements and improvements and enhancements. I think that's been the case with WEIM since its inception, and this is an evolutionary process. And look, we're hopefully to eventually make EDAM, really that next major step in West-wide market integration. We want to get as many of our WEIM partners in as possible, and that's going to require continued listening, I think, and you have my personal commitment to that. I know also we decided, I think wisely, to take a little bit more time on the day-ahead market enhancements. The imbalance reserve product is a super complicated product. It's a key part of the the EDAM value proposition, but there were some really good questions that were still being raised on that topic. So we decided to take a few more months to get that right. So we've appreciated the level of engagement. I think the input of many of you on that is going to continue to be really important. Just a couple other things, and then I know we've got Rob here too. I'm excited to hear his thoughts. Just in general, we're kind of at a pivotal moment, I think, at the ISO. One of the things I'm really focusing on, you guys have heard me talk about this, is just sort of prioritization and focus on our most important initiatives. I know all of you guys probably feel it the same way. There's a lot going on. And I think today, as you hear from Greg and Jillian, we start talking about the policy roadmap. I think we're going to have to be super pragmatic now, especially as we move into EDAM implementation and tariff language, and we've got wheel-throughs. We got to really make sure we're focusing on the highest priority initiatives, and that's got to be really informed by our stakeholders. What is it that you guys are really looking for? How do we make sure that we're now stepping forward on those things that really are going to make the most difference, and making sure that our market design is as effective as possible. And so kicking that dialogue off today, I think is going to be important. Also a chance to listen a little bit more today about failure consequences on the resource efficiency evaluation. That's a key issue. So the input from you guys in terms of our priorities and where we're headed is going to be really important. And as we continue to polish the design is going to be key. And then of course, it's amazing. There's no rest for the weary, right? There's always, as we just took a huge evolutionary step last week, just being able to move into an implementation mode on EDAM was huge. But at the same time, we're hearing just today, I haven't even seen it yet, obviously a press announcement out, I think within the last half hour from Assembly Appropriations Committee Chairman Chris Holden. He's moving out on the bigger governance reform inside California. So later today, there's going to be a regionalization bill advanced into the California legislature. And I think even as we just move into the next phase on EDAM, I think folks are trying to think about what's around the next corner and how do we make sure that we're on a path to independent governance, which I think we all recognize at the end of the day is going to be critical for us to evolve over the next 3, 5, 10 years together. So it's a big deal. We're going to need your help. I think the voices of our friends, both across the spectrum, obviously in California, but across the West, of just making sure our partners in the legislature really understand what's at stake and that we really have an amazing opportunity in front of us to continue evolving together. I know many of you, I look across the screen, a lot of us have been working on these issues for years, right? And it's just cool to see some real tangible progress and the potential to keep keeping the West working together towards common purpose. So I'm really excited. I'll know more. You guys probably know just about as much as I do at the moment, but we get a chance to kind of see a little bit more, a few more details this afternoon as the bill drops. But great moment. Really value the partnership with all of you guys. Thank you so much for all your input and your commitment of time and energy. I know you all have a lot on your plates, and I think we're making a big difference. So thanks for having me here today. Team's looking forward to the dialogue later, and I'm excited to hear from Rob as well. So thanks for having me. Rob?
Thank you, Elliot, and Josh and Vijay and Meg. Thank you for having me back. Glad I was considered to be worthy enough to be invited back. Sometimes you make some comments and you don't know. So it's a really good afternoon, and appreciate those remarks by Elliot. And that was really good news at the end. That's exciting. Really, really positive. That fits in well with the message I'd like to share. So let me start off, though, by congratulating you, Josh and Meg, on your new leadership positions. It's exciting, big challenges, and 2023 ought to be good. That's exciting. And Vijay, thank you for your leadership this past year. A lot of accomplishments, move forward, and I really think that not just addressing issues, but changing RIF's role. Not been easy on taking those actions that were recommended by the GRC and approved by the board and the governing body. And I think it's proving to be effective, and I'll have a little bit more about that. When I last joined, it was 3 months ago, as Elliot noted, and that was back in November. And it's really surprising at how much has really transpired in just 3 months. So I'd like to start off a little bit on that, talking about, as I did before, on our market expert priorities. So when the governing body looks at all the initiatives and looks at allocating limited resources and time, what are the most important things that we want our market expert to provide us input and guidance on? And as a reminder, when we started off the year, and I shared this at the November meeting, we had 4 items. The first one was the resource efficiency evaluation enhancements. The second was EDAM. The third was the transmission service marketing scheduling priorities. And the fourth was price formation, fast start pricing. 4 items 3 months ago. RSEE, that got addressed and approved in December. As everyone knows, last week we addressed EDAM and the transmission service marketing schedule priorities. So 3 of the 4 have been addressed. And as you look at the current initiatives, price formation was already there, and it's still a priority for us. So the governing body, looking at the changes that have been occurring, we said we need to make certain that we get out ahead on the issues with our marketing expert. And the reason is, you heard me use this term before. We felt it was a shame that so much had transpired by the time we brought in our market expert, and we kind of parachuted her in, and there really wasn't a lot of time to have her engaged in the development. We would like to make certain that she gets involved where appropriate as soon as possible or as early as possible. So when we met this past week, our new 2 priorities are 1, DAME, and 2, we kept price formation, fast start pricing there. And that'll probably be good for the first 6 months plus, but based upon the meeting today and the work by CAISO staff, and we take a look at what those new evaluation initiatives are, we'll go back and look at updating that again. But I do think that the big takeaway is 3 of the 4 items have been addressed and are moving forward. And the other one's still a top priority, I know, for CAISO staff, as well as our new one. And we look forward to hearing more on that. One item I was going to touch on, and I'm going to do a little bit less now, was the governing body liaison to the RIF. I did not know Anita was going to be asked to address this at the beginning, so that's excellent. But I do want to say on behalf of the governing body, we're quite proud to take this action. We thought that we needed to be more aligned and understanding where RIF is and make sure we have good, strong, consistent communication. As those of you who have been RIF members for a while, we would rotate that responsibility. So up to 3 of us maximum could attend, and we would just rotate that because we all wanted to attend. What that leads to is it's always somebody different. And we wanted to make certain that, as Anita said, like we do with the body of state regulators, we have a little more consistency, and there is somebody to go through and make certain that the message from the governing body back to the RIF is consistent. And we also have consistency from RIF meeting to RIF meeting in input. So we hope that works well. And I'll just say that, if for some reason we need to make some adjustments, we will. We will make certain that we do a good job of making sure there's good 2-way communications. And as VJ kind of noted, I'm going to give a lot of credit to Member Decker on this one. It's something I had thought about before, and she pushed it with the governing body. And so she deserves a lot of credit in making certain that we had this established. So Anita, thank you on that. And Elliot touched on this as well. But I'd like to say that the RIF is really proving the value that the RIF can provide under your new authority. And I think you need to be congratulated on that. The comments that were provided on governance were of value. When we took a look at this all the input, Elliot mentioned all these letters that came in as well. But to be able to go through and see the consistency in the range and understanding the challenge that RIF has as far as all of the sectors, and being able to come together and say we have consensus on these items is really quite valuable. And so we respect that. And just so you know, the governing body is listening, and we get the message. And the other one was certainly the work that was done in January on DAME. The presentations, discussions, quite valuable. As Elliot mentioned, that as a result of that and other interactions, there were, I guess, enough questions to say, let's make certain we get it right. And so, again, we're listening, and I think there's a lot of value in that. And so RIF has the ability to help shape and drive and do things where it's appropriate. And under this new authority, we want to make certain that we do things right. Before I conclude, I would like to remind everybody that the governing body needs to maintain a arm length separation, that the RIF is independent of the governing body. And so we're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to drive an agenda for you. We're not going to tell you specifically what to take action on, but we do want to make certain that we do have that strong communication. So I want to finish with this. I think the last RIF meeting demonstrated that there can be really high quality civil debate on issues. And I think as Elliot noted and VJ, you noted that the joint Board of Governors and governing body meeting really demonstrated that the West can achieve consensus on big issues and be successful on that. And with that, in those two elements, I think there should be a lot of optimism for the future. And Elliot's comments on the potential legislation coming out on whatever it might be on increased regionalization is really good news. And I think there's a lot to look forward to. And so with that, I conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Chair Conzioka. Appreciate it. And also, Elliot, thank you for your remarks as well. Before we move on, Vijay has a quick comment, and then we'll move into the bulk of the meeting for today.
Yes, and having been the chair before, time management is critical for these meetings. I just want to thank, it's not about thanking to thank, but I really want to appreciate, Elliot, your commitment and interest in attending RIF meetings, giving time on November 8th. You could have had a lot more going on. But I think seeing the operational and the executive sides of CalISO engaging with RIF is a valuable signal. And then to Chair Conzioka, I just want to say that I think it'll be valuable. I reiterate my comment about notifying to RIF when you feel we should take something on earlier on. So that's just my comment. So thank you. Thanks, Josh.
Right.
Thanks, Vijay.
Thank you, guys. All the best.
Thank you. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is a CAISO policy team update on the 2023 revised policy initiative catalog and draft roadmap. Now we're taking this up as an element associated with the newly approved Governance Review Committee's recommendations on the Regional Issues Forum kicking off the annual policy roadmap process by hosting a roundtable. Now we're a little kind of pressed in terms of in time and opportunity to review and provide significant impact or significant input in the roadmap today, but this is maybe a really good first step in starting to use the RIF as again as a tool and a vehicle for review and insight into what the priorities are, starting with what CAISO's view is, and then kind of translating that into whether or not it meets the needs of the sectors. So with that, we are met by Greg Cook, the Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy at CAISO, and Jillian Bidler, Policy Integration and Governance Manager at CAISO as well. So welcome to the RIF, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks, Josh. Maybe I'll tee it up, and then I'll hand it over to Jillian to run through the slides. So we run the policy initiative roadmap process every year, and usually it's run. We start it in the late summer, early fall period and conclude it around December. We're running it a little bit later this year, primarily because we wanted to get some more insight on the timing of EDAM and DAME to help us derive the roadmap for this year. So, you know, and I think what we have is kind of a sneak peek that we're going to present today as to what we would be putting out as a draft in our stakeholder process that we're looking to start here in the next week or so. So, you know, with that, I'll say that, you know, it's really always a very challenging issue for us to try and come up with the roadmap. You know, we start with the catalog process, which is a way for us to identify all potential initiatives. So that's open for all stakeholders to suggest initiatives. We also do an internal search at the ISO for potential initiatives, and we list them all in the catalog. I haven't counted in a while, but the last time I counted, I think there were something like 75 initiatives in that catalog. So obviously, we can't do, and I don't think anybody would want us to try and do 75 initiatives in a year. So, we have to do a lot of cutting back. And, I kind of like Elliot's word. We're trying to be very, pragmatic in how we put the catalog, the roadmap together this year. So with that, I will hand it over to Jillian, and she can run through our preliminary thoughts on this.
Great, thanks, Greg, and thank you all very much for the opportunity to present the preliminary draft policy initiatives roadmap, delayed as it is, but thanks for the context around that from Greg and Elliot. I had a few notes before we dive into the presentation. First was that we spoke, I spoke with this group several months ago about the more general roadmap, catalog and roadmap process. I think Greg touched on that. I was just going to sort of remind you that, of the process that we go through on an annual basis to solicit feedback through the policy initiatives catalog, and then as a secondary step through this roadmap development. So Greg, having said that, I won't repeat his description of that, but I did want to just take a second to say thank you very much for your interest at that time in just the process itself, and for staying engaged and wanting to hear more about the roadmap as we are developing it, and also excited to kind of figure out how we can work together in the future with the with more of a workshop, something like that we can talk about in the Q&A session. But I really appreciate the interest on your part. So the other thing I wanted to say is, for those who haven't spent a bunch of time with the roadmap, you will see a few things. For those of you who have, you'll see things that you recognize, but there's also a little bit of a difference in the way we've structured it this year. So I wanted to describe what you're going to see on the upcoming slides. First of all, what we've done is we've taken all the initiatives that we plan on undertaking over the next 3 years, for 2023 through 2025. And we've really put them under the umbrellas of the individual strategic objectives that are developed by the CAISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body. In particular, they really fall under objectives 1, 2, and 3. So we've structured it that way so that it's, the reason for the prioritization and the motivation behind the initiative is clear and tied back to those shared objectives. So we'll just go through each of the 3 strategic objectives that are touched by the initiative here. In turn, I have a little bit of a narrative to kick off the discussion prior to the discussion of each strategic objective. And then, those are followed by the beloved swim lanes, which I know everybody's looking forward to delving into. So with that said, Silas, I think we can go to the first content slide. And so this kicks off a discussion of initiatives that we feel really support strategic objective number 1. Just as a reminder, that's to reliably and efficiently integrate new resources by proactively upgrading operational capabilities. So these are really these are really initiatives that we think support the markets and reliability through markets. So that's I guess the short way of saying what is eloquently said there. You'll see on the upcoming slide the price formation enhancements work, which we've broken into two phases. The first being the one that focuses on scarcity pricing, market power mitigation, and fast start pricing, and then one to start later on that works through issues of big cost recovery and the multi-interval optimization. It's hard to fit a bunch of this stuff on a slide. I apologize for the acronyms, and I will try to say them out loud for anybody trying to get up to speed on these acronyms. I think sometimes we forget and we just speak in acronyms. So if I miss that, hit me in the chat, or we can talk about it in the Q&A session. You'll see in, not necessarily called out in the following swim lanes, but you'll see initiatives here that are non-discretionary, which are really those initiatives that are ongoing or required for reliability or are ordered by FERC. So you can see that FERC Order 881 will be on this upcoming slide, and that is one that we have, a FERC order to complete on a specific timeline. And then you'll also see a variable energy resource and storage dispatch enhancements. That one we've decided to expand that one a little bit. It used to be just called variable energy resource dispatch enhancements. It's being expanded to really reflect the changing resource mix and the fact that that there are challenges for operations in reliably integrating the storage resources with their fast ramp rates in particular. So that one is one that we've expanded a little bit, and you'll see that included on the next slide. So Silas, with that, we can go to that next slide. And before we kind of walk through these initiatives again, I wanted to point out that at this time we have the blocks here with the sort of small font describing what the initiative is, with occasional parenthetical notes just to help orient you. And that really reflects the effort through the policy development, through the board approval and governing body approval process, and through the tariff writing process. Well, that sometimes is a little bit of a moving target, but that's really what's intended to be captured in that blue box there, where the arrow pointing to the diamond there on the right is really intended to be our best thinking at this time about implementation timelines. So you'll see a few caveats on the slide. We're kind of calling those diamonds the no sooner than implementation target. And I have a little note there as well at the bottom that says the timeframes are approximate and subject to change. Stuff happens in the implementation process and things can slip, but we really wanted to present this anyway with all the caveats to depict visually our, like I said, our best thinking and for what those timelines mean for, for workload, for ISO staff, for all market participants, for our vendors. It's, I mean, the first thing that catches my eye is those 3 diamonds in the fall of 2025, and that is a daunting implementation sort of triumvirate right there. So we really would like to have your feedback. I mean, again, with the caveat that these dates are our best thinking at this early date, but what those implementation timelines mean for you and your organizations, and any hurdles that you see or issues that you see with those, as well as, of course, with the actual policy process in the nearer term. Okay, having said all that, you can see here that phase 1 of price formation enhancements. We're getting started with workshops to really educate on these complex issues. And then that's the first phase of price formation enhancements, and then you can see after that wraps up towards the latter half of 2024, we would be starting the second phase of price formation enhancements. I mentioned FERC Order 881. We don't anticipate that it will be a tremendous or a contentious or difficult stakeholder process. We expect that to be mostly mechanical and dealing with information submittal and those kinds of concerns, but it is going to be a difficult one to implement. It touches a lot of systems, so we've kind of given ourselves a big long chunk there of 2024 to work on that. And then again, the variable energy resource and storage dispatch enhancements, which will focus, it'll change focus a little bit, like I said, to really focus on reliably working with the ramp rates in particular that are associated with variable energy resources and particular storage. Okay. Silas, I'm sorry about you again. I need to go forward to the next slide. Which is, again, sort of a little bit of a narrative to give some background before we get into the swim lanes associated with the initiatives that we have categorized under strategic objective number 2. Again, for reference, for those who don't think about the strategic objectives every day, that objective is really to strengthen RA, resource adequacy, and meet California's SB 100 goals through long-term transmission planning and effective coordination with state agencies. That's a mouthful, and that's appropriate because it is a tremendous amount of work, and even sort of defining that work is challenging. But you'll see a large placeholder for resource adequacy enhancements work, which will begin after we've really had a chance to fully scope that out and strategize about how best to approach RA enhancements given the CPUC policies as well as the ISO's needs as the balancing authority area. And then you'll see some relatively small changes to the capacity procurement mechanism. One is the near-term changes that are going to the board in March, but then tariff required review in CPM phase 2 of tariff required review of the soft offer cap. And in addition, some placeholders for work on the transmission side, including some anticipated FERC NOPRs that are, so that's a little bit of a placeholder. Those are somewhat unknown, but we wanted to make sure that it was clear that that was going to require some work of all of us. So that's there for completeness sake. We can go on to the next slide, and we can see this visually. Again, CPM phase 1 going into effect at the end of 2023, October, and then the CPM enhancements phase 2, that soft offer cap update. I have the hardest time saying soft offer cap. I need to slow down. Apologies. To be implemented in advance of summer 2024. I have a block here for interconnection process enhancements. I don't have, that was added relatively recently. I didn't want to even try without more input and thought to add an arrow and a diamond for that one, caveated as they are. So that one, it looks a little bit lonely floating out there, but there's a little bit more work to do. This is a preliminary draft roadmap, and that's one piece that needs to be firmed up, I think. Also, as I noted, the RA enhancements, that's a giant long block there, and lots of things will be happening, but like I said, it's still being really scoped out and strategized about internally. It's been a big effort to approach that with a long-term view. I mentioned a couple NOPRs. We'll have a FERC order eventually on transmission planning and extreme events planning, which will require work in 2024. And then with maybe a less defined timeline, we expect to work on generator interconnection enhancements based on a FERC order starting at some point in 2024 and ongoing. All right, and then finally, we can walk through the initiatives that are perhaps saving the best for last for this group. The Strategic Objective 3, which is on the next slide, Silas, if you don't mind. Thank you. Which is to build on the foundation of the WEIM, the acronym you all know well, so I don't mind not saying that one out, to further expand Western market opportunities. So here's where you're going to see very familiar friends, the extended day-ahead market, the day-ahead market enhancements, TSMSP, the wheeling initiative, and obviously EDAM and wheeling. Sorry for the shorthand on that one. That's just that acronym is a mouthful. Were approved at the board just recently, and we look forward to continuing to work on day-ahead market enhancements and taking that to the board in the coming months. And then we have some anticipated initiatives out in the future, really relative to the extended day-ahead market, the CAISO's participation as a balancing authority area, and to address coordination across greenhouse gas areas. There's some uncertainty there. So again, we really appreciate your feedback and your thinking on these issues. Your insights are much appreciated. So we can go to the next slide, which depicts this visually, and I went ahead and made EDAM. I beg your pardon, my color coding is off here. I intended to make the extended day ahead market and the transmission services and market scheduling priorities, the wheeling initiative, green. Unfortunately, I made DAME green, so that was wishful thinking perhaps on my part. Looking forward to having that one done soon. EDAM and the wheeling are still on here despite sort of being in a different phase. I thought I would call them out by color, but I apologize for any confusion that my miscoloring created. As mentioned, obviously we're going to have to come up with some processes for how the ISO as a BAA participates in the extended day ahead market. We will really need to look carefully at greenhouse gas coordination in the extended day ahead market. And there are obviously dependencies with the development of state regulations that we need to be respectful of, cognizant of, and that we are, in a lot of ways constrained by. So that's the reason that I have left. Oh, I apologize for my dog. If you can hear barking, I tried to talk them out of that, but they don't really listen to me. I went ahead on the greenhouse gas coordination and left off the implementation arrow, just largely out of recognition that there are dependencies that we really can't really predict at this time. Although we would again like your feedback on that as to when we'll have regulations firm from different states across the West. So we really look forward to more discussion around that. RSEE is the initiative that keeps on giving, so we look forward to starting RSEE Phase 3 towards the end of this year and working towards implementing that in 2025. But another diamond, although not depicted in the same slide, but it really is another diamond that lands in the fall of 2025, again highlighting just how much implementation is intended for that time frame. And finally, not to be sneaky, but there's this little tiny box down at the bottom that's anticipated policy initiatives starting in the middle of 2025 that is intended to capture the recognition that there will be EDAM enhancements needed based on operational experience. It's hard to put detail around that, but we expect that, at some point as we start doing testing and we start, really getting far down the path on the extended day ahead market, we'll recognize some places where we would need to make some changes or enhancements. So just out of recognition and wanting to make sure that that's represented as part of the considerable workload here. Okay, so I just have a couple, just like 2 or 3 cleanups or closing slides that I wanted to offer. We can go to slide 8. I just wanted to call out, not everything. We tried to capture really in those swim lanes. Those can get very busy very fast. And so we try to really represent the core of the work that we're doing. But there are, of course, other things that are on our plates. There are, and so here I've tried to put in a list of those. And I won't take the time to go through each of these in turn. It was brought to my attention that generator deliverability challenges is one that I should have had on here, and that was not on my radar. So I appreciate that feedback early. And I will incorporate that in the future roadmap. There are also these are the known things that we have on our plate. There are times when things crop up in the middle of the year, or due to a reliability issue or a FERC order, and those can. Sorry, pets always want to participate in Zoom meetings. It's aggravating. And those are, of course, impossible to plan for. Sometimes we can sort of see them coming down the road, but we recognize that historically there have always been initiatives that have cropped up despite our best efforts to get them on the the roadmap, they come up after we finalize it. I joke sometimes that the roadmap is like the definition of a moving target. It does feel like that sometimes, but you know, that's why we try to do it on an annual basis and try to get input on the roadmap, you know, and the policy initiative catalog early. So again, thank you for your interest in participating in that effort. Okay, and then on slide 9, I have just a couple initiatives that you, if you've been following this closely in the past, you may have, if we can go to slide 9, there are a couple initiatives that you may have seen and you may have said, hey, where did those go? And they were either, you know, became obviated by other market changes or evolution of the market, or they were no longer of interest to those stakeholders that submitted them originally, or to the ISO, if the ISO is the initiator of those initiatives. So not many of those. Most work does not leave the roadmap. Most work gets added to the roadmap, which is a big part of the challenge. But I wanted to include those here for the sake of completeness. Finally, just a closing slide, slide 10, just with some next steps. And I'm sure that we'll have a more robust discussion of next steps in the Q&A session and after Josh and Meg contribute some thoughts following this presentation. But I did want to give you the upcoming schedule with the nuts and bolts of what we have planned in the near term. So we just are still working, again, this is draft preliminary draft, getting input from groups across the ISO, from leadership, really reflecting what Elliot and Greg talked about earlier, our efforts at prioritization and being realistic with what's on the roadmap, pragmatic about it. I think the word pragmatic is fantastic as well. But we're still pleased to bring to you this current thinking and you know, recognize that it's a work in progress, and we appreciate your helping that progress along. So here we are, February 8th at the RIF. We'd love to, you know, seriously take notes on your feedback today. We welcome, you know, feedback directly to me or Greg or to your account managers or the stakeholder comments email box. If you come up with something after we finish this discussion here today. We want to take all of that and publish a draft roadmap and catalog for the broader stakeholder community, and to have that in a call, or discuss that in a call on February 21st, so the day after the President's Day weekend. We'll be fresh and excited to talk about roadmap again. And then we'll give, you know, as our normal process, we generally post something, have a meeting about a week later, and then request comments be due a week after that. We'll incorporate all that comments and go through our, again, internal processes, and then we look forward to giving the ISO board and WEIM governing body a briefing describing the roadmap in their executive session at the March meeting, followed by publication of the final roadmap and catalog, and then a briefing for the board in the public session in May. So with that said, I think I would like to pause there. I hope I was parsimonious with my time to allow for robust discussion. And I guess I will turn it back over to Josh and Meg.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks, Greg. That was a great introduction to the roadmap. I really appreciate it. So maybe to kind of help set the stage for the next kind of portion of the discussion, Meg has put together some initial questions and comments directed at specifically to the presentation. I'll then, after Meg's had a chance to go through questions and impressions, we'll open it up to the RIF liaison group with some additional kind of guided questions And then time permitting, we'll also attempt to open up questions to the participants on the call. But to the extent that we don't have time to get to everyone's questions, I do want to reiterate Jillian's call for comments to the regular stakeholder process, but also again to continue under the idea and request from the Governance Review Committee's proposal is to reach out to your liaisons and give impressions to us that we hopefully can then turn into consensus building or impressions through the kind of the new pathways for input in the governance process. So I do encourage folks to reach out to liaisons and give impressions through the RIF process as well as through the stakeholder process. With that, I'll hand things over to Meg, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Meg.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, Greg and Jillian. That was a really informative presentation, and I think it gives us a good framework and understanding for the roadmap process for this year and what we can be anticipating as stakeholders. So I wanted to talk a little bit, Jillian, you had mentioned this at the beginning of your presentation, that the CAISO has taken the approach of trying to tie different initiatives to strategic objectives that the the Board of Governors and governing body have put in place. Can you talk a little bit more about how you determined which initiatives fit within those strategies and kind of how you set the timeline for those?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll let Greg speak to the first part of your question, but about categorizing those initiatives. But one of the things that you'll see in the policy initiatives catalog, and it is, as Greg alluded to, it's a whale of a document. I mean, it's got, I haven't counted how many initiatives are in there lately either, but about 70, 75 sounds about right. It is a lot to wade through, but a lot of what drives, and again, I'll let Greg speak to the categorization under the different strategic objectives, but a lot of what drives the timelines and the initiatives that end up on the roadmap are really practical things. What initiatives are discretionary versus non-discretionary? We have quite a few that are non-discretionary, and that sounds maybe a little bit wonky, but I think it's important to consider that things that we consider non-discretionary are those that are needed for reliability, those that we've committed to stakeholders to doing, that are already in the works, or that future initiatives depend upon, or that are required by FERC order or some other regulatory requirement like that. So that really drives. You can see those. Discussion of those. We try to include discussion of those. It's not really captured here in the sort of graphical, PowerPoint setting, but the discussion about discretionary versus non-discretionary initiatives is drawn out more in that larger policy initiative catalog. And so the timelines are often driven by how complex or the initiatives are, how contentious we expect them to be, how much stakeholdering we expect to need to do, how many iterations of proposals do we need to do, workshops, and that kind of drives the timeline for that. And of course, implementation timelines, we get feedback from other groups within the ISO that work on those implementation efforts. There's a lot of discussion that goes into how big to make how long to make those boxes, how long to make those arrows. And I maybe I'll stop there and yield my time. I don't even know what my time was, but I'll stop there and I'll let Greg maybe speak to the links between the strategic goals and the individual initiatives.
Yeah, so we look at, again, when we're looking at the strategic initiatives, and admittedly, there's probably some overlap between strategic initiative 1 and 3. But really, when we're looking at strategic initiative 1, that's, looking at initiatives that are either going to enhance the reliability of the dispatch of the system or the efficiency or both. And, so a lot of those are market design enhancements. Again, we think, we do believe that, we're trying to get both reliability and efficiency provided by the markets. And then, when you're looking at strategic initiative number 2, those are largely focused on, ISO, BA type initiatives, so resource adequacy, interconnection, transmission planning, those types of BAA functions generally fall under strategic objective number 2. And then, clearly strategic objective number 3 is those that are looking at expanding the markets west-wide. So, things like EDAM as well as the day-ahead market enhancements that'll be used, as the foundation for EDAM as well. So, and we'll also include the various EIM initiatives in that category as well. So that's generally how the breakout occurs. And, again, it helps us to really align to make sure that we are focused on our high priority initiatives that are aligned with the strategic plan of the ISO.
That makes sense, Greg. Thanks. And just following up on that a little bit, how are you balancing the initiatives that are needed to address the CAISO's responsibilities as a balancing authority or transmission operator as compared with those that the ISO needs to undertake in its role as the market operator? How do you strike the right balance there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Meg. And that's all obviously something that it's a challenging thing to do. And again, that's where we try and use the strategic plan as a guide. Both strategic objective number 1 and 2 are both part of that strategic plan. So they're both high priorities for the ISO. And, a lot of it comes down to, where is the greatest need, as well as there's other factors that come into play when we do the planning for the roadmap, such as implementation timelines, potentially initiatives that are, have dependencies with one another, those types of things, so that, we ultimately come up with what we think is a good plan that will be well coordinated among all the initiatives and ultimately feasible for implementation. That being said, we don't try and, parse out a specific amount of resources for the BAA function versus the market function, but, we're trying to instead, as both are a priority of ours, to make sure we do really what we think are, rational decisions that are most effective and most effectively using both ours and our stakeholders' resources in developing and implementing policy going forward.
Greg, so one thing that jumped out at me as I was looking over the slides for this presentation is really just how ambitious the CAISO is in terms of covering these initiatives over the next 3 years. There's a lot there. And I'm interested to see, Jillian, where the sort of extra initiatives that you had included on slide 8, where they fit in terms of the timeline. It seems like we're all going to be pretty busy. How does the ISO envision incorporating any stakeholder feedback on the initiative prioritization? How do you see being able to integrate that into the final version of the roadmap? How much wiggle room or give do you have?
Well, I mean, I think you set me up well with that question, because it is a very full plate, and so it is hard to find wiggle room. I mean, we are, very eager for feedback on the prioritization as well as the timelines that we've, put out as our best thinking. Again, for now, it's, I will say that it's difficult to add to the roadmap. We've sort of put out what we think is like, what we can be like, again, to highlight that word being pragmatic, what we think we can get done is what's represented here, knowing that unknown things are coming down the pipe, inevitably, always. We sort of feel like, we welcome suggestions on adding things. It's challenging. We'd also, highlight that adding things was going to require other things to move or be put on the back burner. We welcome that feedback as well, of course. But I think you hit the nail on the head. This sort of represents a full workload across the ISO and honestly for stakeholders as well.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you. That's really helpful. Before I turn things back to Josh for a broader discussion among the liaisons and stakeholders, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts, either really Greg or Jillian, on how the RIF might incorporate the GRC's proposal that the RIF do an annual roundtable process to help inform initiative prioritization. The RIF is still evaluating how to undertake that roundtable, but we would be interested in the CAISO's thinking on how we can be helpful in that process.
Well, I could take the first stab at that, but I'm sure Greg would like to add as well, so I'll be quick. We're really excited to partner with you. I put some thought into this based on our conversations earlier this week, and I really think that, we probably would want to engage with you, like starting very early. And when I say that, I think really right from the start, when in the middle of the year, like, as we sort of start to wrap up summer, we call for submissions for consideration to the policy initiatives catalog. So we'd really like to get, maybe that is the right time to have, a roundtable or a preliminary meeting where folks brainstorm about what really are your wants, needs, and desires, and what you would like to see reflected in the catalog, and underscoring the importance and the sort of ranking and the scope of those things, so that we can then, when we kind of move through that catalog process and start going toward building out these swim lanes representing the prioritization, we've got that early thinking that helps us, help that sort of shape the draft from the draft roadmap from the get-go. So that would be my thinking on that, and so maybe there would be sort of two roundtables, one, to get together your collective thoughts for submission to the catalog process, and then maybe later as we come up with a initial preliminary draft of the roadmaps to share, that we do something like this again. I think that would be really effective. And that said, I realize we're over time just a little bit, but that said, I do want to point out that, we really did take a step back on this particular roadmap effort to try to do some more like soul searching to really capture a realistic and thoughtful prioritization of these initiatives. And so this process did slip over into 2023 longer than obviously we would ultimately like it. And so I feel like we, because of that, we're sort of struggling at this point to get this through and over the finish line. But I'm really optimistic about the engagement on the next round, which starts all too soon, and getting your input kind of now that we have this good baseline and we've got some guidance as to how to proceed with that, getting that input, the roundtable, et cetera. I think that it may feel like it's racing towards the finish line on this go around, although that does not mean that feedback is not welcome, appreciated, and incorporated. But I'm hoping we have a little bit more breathing room to think through this whole process more deeply and collaboratively on the next go around. So with that, I'll pause and see if Greg has anything to add.
No, I think I think that would be a good process to help get that feedback. I think the timing is very important. If we could get that, early, I think, starting late summer, going into early fall, because that's really when we, get into establishing what the roadmap's going to look like for the next year. I'll point out, we definitely welcome working with the RIF on this. Any type of, unified or at least close to unified, positions on initiatives is extremely helpful. I've been doing this a long time. We've tried all kinds of different things on the roadmap. We even had a voting process once, and like I said, we had 75 initiatives. I think we had, one vote on 35 of them. So, when you have that kind of outcome, it's really hard to decide what to do. So, any type of, group thought that you have, we definitely welcome that going forward. And any way that we can help facilitate that, we're more than willing to do.
Well, thank you both. Josh, I'm going to turn things back to you.
Yeah, thanks again. Okay, I'll open kind of questions off to the RIF liaison group first. We've got a little over 15 minutes, so I'm going to maybe set the stage for two questions. Going to kind of combine them into one. First is, even though we've really only just seen the roadmap, general impressions coupled with the ideas, and it's perfect that we have this slide up with timelines, right? So the idea of what are initial general reactions to the roadmap, and then additionally, do we feel like there's ample time in the process for meaningful feedback back to both the to CAISO and, again, as mentioned earlier, any opportunity that we may be able to help and support issues and ideas through the RIF. So I'll start things off, and we did have an early volunteer to go first. So maybe I'll start with Lindsay if she wants to provide some input, and then raise your hands otherwise to go down the list.
Okay, yes, thank you. I had an initial reaction. I do know that there were 3 Desert Southwest entities that submitted comments back in September on the catalog process, requesting a prioritization for gas resources and gas management in the catalog, and I noticed that did not make it into the catalog. So I was wondering if those sort of comments are considered in this roadmap process, or if you have, I guess, considered that feedback.
I appreciate the question. We do go through all of the submissions and try to respond to those in the catalog. And I frankly am not remembering the details of those off the top of my head. I do remember reading through those and trying to work with client reps and do the research to figure out what those issues were. I would have to follow up with you offline, Lindsay. I wish I could answer you off the top of my head. Sorry.
That's fine. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Looks like Matt may have a reaction or a question as well.
Yeah, I have a different question. So with regard to the catalog and the 75 or so, I think about 65 of those are stakeholder proposed initiatives or ideas, some of which go back several years. It becomes hard to motivate oneself, and I'll speak for my organization, get my coworkers to write up new ideas when there's such a huge backlog ahead of us and already a full plate of high priority initiatives. And I think we all agree everything on the roadmap is important to many, if not all, stakeholders. We certainly agree that the things you're prioritizing are important. So I guess the question is, what should we be doing as a community to think about, organizing and maybe retiring some of those ideas that are in that big backlog?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. And, you know, we do try and call the catalog, you know, every year, but, you know, it's difficult to, you know, take initiatives off unless we have a good reason to. Usually it's because they've been subsumed by other initiatives. But, you know, I think what would be helpful is, you know, again, we don't, you know, it is, I guess I wouldn't characterize it as a backlog because it's not a queue for doing initiatives. We really, you know, look at reprioritizing those initiatives each year, you know, based on, you know, what are the drivers from, you know, the market and reliability and how the grid is changing and what the needs are. And so, you know, I think what would be helpful is if you have initiatives you want on, again, it's really helpful to us if you can also help justify as to, you know, why you believe these should be high priority initiatives. Because, you know, a lot of times we're having to, you know, make our own assumptions about that, but the more information and context we have around the need and the benefits of the initiative, you know, that'll help us to, you know, prioritize those going forward. And then furthermore, you know, also, you know, very welcome to comments for taking initiatives out of the catalog because either they're no longer relevant or, you know, the industry's changed in a way that would, you know, their benefit has diminished over time, things like that.
Yeah, maybe just a quick follow-up observation, Greg, and I put this in comments before, so you've probably seen it, but, you know, when the ISO staff puts an initiative forward, often, you know, it's many subtopics under a big heading like, you know, price formation. A lot of these stakeholder initiatives might be groupable, and you should think about, you know, maybe individually they don't rise to the high priority level, but 3 or 4 or 5 initiatives together could be grouped neatly to make an initiative that would be worth pursuing. That's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Matt. It's a good comment.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, any from the liaison group, any other initial thoughts, questions?
This is Vijay.
Let's take it first.
Thank you. This is very helpful. I just want to comment that I think, like you said earlier, and I'm forgetting your name, please. I'm sorry. That some of the items that you've dropped for now, it's valuable to know the why or the reason behind what gets selected and what's put on the side table. So Greg, if you don't mind, that'll be helpful context for the RIF liaisons, because in the past, we spent a lot of time debating what topics RIF feels is important, but not knowing where and how CalISO staff thinks is not important or important would be helpful in our thinking what to take on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. We'll definitely try and do that.
Yeah, that's great. And we do try to do that within the catalog, go through for each of the submissions and try to respond if whether we included it or whether we decided it was not actually a policy initiative and we put it elsewhere. So we do sincerely make an effort at that. And honestly, I like the suggestion in the chat to restructure the comments template for the stakeholder catalog to include a spot for folks to respond as to, you know, what initiatives we think we could like deprioritize or even like, you know, take off or, you know, put mothball, whatever the right terminology is, and then make some more room for things and shift things around in that way so that it's not such an overwhelming document and it can kind of better reflect some initial attempts at prioritization.
Thank you, Julian. And I didn't even read Sybil's comment until now, so we were thinking on the same level. Thank you. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, Kathleen?
Thanks, Josh. So quick question, kind of more along the lines of Lindsay's, which is process oriented. How do certain kinds of actions that occur during the year kind of feed into these deliverables? So I'll give an example that what I'm curious about is when a board meeting occurs and there's a commitment at the leadership level or direction from, you know, guidance from the governing body or a board member, and CAISO says at the board meeting, we commit to addressing this year. How does it feed, like, it's not super transparent in your slides that, you know, this initiative is responsive to that, although I will acknowledge, I want to
highlight that EDAM greenhouse gas coordination appears responsive to the discussion that we just had recently at the governing body and board. I think a tiny transparency thing that would be helpful would be to make that clear when you're going through and presenting this. This was just asked by multiple entities, and the council leadership committed to it. This is the initiative that resulted from it. That would be helpful to be able to track that through. But I also wanted to ask you today, how are you tracking that? Because I see one that was committed to in December's meeting, not on this roadmap. And so I think those are good examples, right? So Elliot committed to working on the storage challenges in this upcoming year, much more expansive than you discussed. The interplay between AS and energy, the physical modeling challenges, the mitigation challenges we've raised. So that's a much broader scope item that was committed to at that board meeting in December. And I don't see that there. So I was wondering if you could help us understand how you are taking those board commitments and tracking them into the roadmap.
Yeah, I'd say we do that in two ways. The first is when we know of that in advance and it's a planned initiative for the future, we depict that in the catalog. So, ISO commitments, which would be commitments to the boards, commitments to FERC, those types of things, those then get categorized as non-discretionary initiatives. So, we're essentially trying to find room. They have priority over the discretionary initiatives, which are, the nice to have initiatives, but, there's no regulatory requirement or commitment for us to actually take those on. They've just been, either requested by a stakeholder or group of stakeholders, or the ISO is, identified as a potential improvement. The second is then those commitments that come up, within the year, between the time we're putting out roadmaps. And, a lot of times these can end up as some of those, unplanned initiatives that Jillian was talking about. And, we do try, and we have, in particularly if the roadmap's changing a lot, it is somewhat of an evergreen document. So we will, provide quarterly updates if necessary on changes to the roadmap. And, if we had to do some reprioritization because of a, recent commitment or requirement of a stakeholder initiative that we have to take on, which may require us pushing out other initiatives, those types of things. So, we try and keep both the EM governing body as well as the board, as well as the stakeholders up to date on, what the current plan is in the event that it needs to be modified.
That's helpful, Greg. So I'm hearing that you may not have just updated this draft to include the recent commitment made at the December board, and we'll see an update with the storage effort.
Yeah, we'll look into that a little more.
Okay.
I think we need to look into some of the details on that as to whether we thought it was that required a new initiative or whether we thought it might be included in other initiatives we already have on the roadmap. But, we'll provide more details on that.
Thanks, guys. So maybe switching gears a little bit, and we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'll ask or kind of kick off another topic. As part of what we're ultimately doing today, right, is heeding to the request associated with the Governance Review Committee's roundtable idea in their proposal. So I do think that there's some issues or opportunity for improvement associated with how we can be more effective in this roundtable discussion in the development of the roadmap. And Jillian, I appreciate your earlier comments about being included and involved earlier on in the process. I think that would definitely be helpful. In terms of timing for effectiveness and working towards what our sector priorities are and being able to use sector priorities, sector conversations and priorities after having some level of visibility in the roadmap will be maybe helpful in years to come in terms of a timing element. I do feel like, with the idea the roadmap being published on the 13th and comments due on the 27th, there may not be significant amount of time to that kind of whole cloth review and input from the various sectors. Of course, we'll try our best to do that. But in terms of initial reactions to both timing and to our charge, I do feel like there may be some opportunity for improvements in the process. And again, if we're moving from the catalog into roadmap, that timing element is I think a great opportunity, end of the year up until now, for RIF feedback. But with that, I also would love to open that up to questions if there's any sort of response or thoughts on process, and how we can be effective in essentially helping you put together an effective roadmap. Alex, did you have a thought? I saw you come off camera.
Yeah, I did have a question for our speakers, and I get to moderate the next one, so this hopefully will demonstrate there's no such thing as a bad question. But in your slide deck there, you talk about FERC 881 and about how it streamlines the initiative process. Do I understand that bullet to mean that there is this initiative process, the stakeholder policy initiative process that we're seeing now, it's going to change under FERC 881? There's going to be no, is that completely off base? So feel free to correct me if my understanding of what FERC 881 is supposed to address is off base.
So FERC Order 881 has to do with implementation of dynamic line ratings. So it really is, there's less policy discussion required around that. FERC has already told us they want us to implement dynamic line ratings. So that's why we think that there'll be a relatively short stakeholder process. But really the bulk of the work that we'll need to do on that one is related to implementation. So that was what I was trying to capture in that bullet, and I will try to reword it to make it more clear. Thank you.
Okay, that's perfect. There you go. No such thing as a bad question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We are at 2:44. I'm a little hesitant to open the lines, but I also don't want to keep the 110 or so participants on the call waiting in the wings for burning questions. So maybe to the extent we can get a question or two in from those participating in the call, that would be helpful, and then go into a break in 2, 3, 4 minutes. So we could open the lines for questions, that would be great.
To our attendees, if you would like to ask a question, you can press the raise hand icon located just above the chat panel to enter the verbal question queue, or you can send chat questions to all panelists. To those attendees dialed into our phone-only line, you can dial #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. There seems to be no questions in queue at this time.
Phew, okay, that's helpful. All right, well, I very much appreciate your time, Jillian and Greg. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation and answers to questions. We look forward to working with you throughout the process.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, well, we are now going to move into a 15-minute break. We'll be back on at 3 o'clock.
Josh, you are currently muted.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for your patience and listening to us in the earlier conversation. Hopefully, we can have some great dialogue throughout this process. Our next subject is the Western EIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation and a conversation on failure consequences, led by Alex Spain and Vijay Satyal. So I want to just hand it off to the RIF sector liaisons that are going to be kind of ushering us through this next section. So thanks for this, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Josh. So for folks again, my name is Alex Spain. I work with Bonneville Power, and I am the sector liaison for the Federal Power Marketing Administrations. And today, this last hour of our meeting, Vijay and I are going to moderate a discussion about resource efficiency evaluation, failure consequences, principles, and some proposals. As Jillian, I think Jillian stated it very nicely during her discussion, this is the initiative that just keeps on giving. It's now about ready to enter into phase 3. This has been about 2 years in the making through phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 culminated, and one of the things it culminated with was an ability for EIM entities, participating entities, to opt in to failing the flexi ramp or the capacity up and provision and continue to receive EIM imports. So some folks equate this to the ability to lien in the event that you fail resource efficiency if you were to opt into this option. As folks might know, the settlement provisions or the penalty provisions for this initiative are proposed to be out of market, so there's not going to be in-market solutions. And the idea here is that phase 3 will continue to evaluate the consequences of the failing resource efficiency and see whether the penalty mechanisms, how it's calculated, whether it's in market or out market. The proposal does not allow folks who fail the downward capacity tests to continue to export out of the EIM participating entity. So maybe that is going to be an issue that some of our speakers are going to talk to as well. We have 4 distinguished speakers. Vijay and I are going to co-moderate this. So Vijay I'm going to hand the mic quickly here to Vijay, who will then walk us through each of the presenters. But one of the things that I did want to highlight is the fact that you'll notice that 3 of the 4 speakers are sector liaisons. And I really want to reiterate what Josh said in that, this forum is a forum for our members, and we really appreciate all those who have in the past have volunteered to speak at RIF meetings. Today we've got Bonnie, who will introduce herself here shortly to present her views as it relates to resource efficiency. But really, you can see here from the SharePoint site who your sector liaison is, and if there are any issues that you want to see the RIF body tackle going forward, or if you want to participate as a future speaker for issues that we've highlighted and that we'd like to hear from our community about, we really appreciate you raising your hands and participating. This is intended to be, a very friendly, safe place to ask questions. Hence I took a bullet there with my earlier question about FERC 881. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a nice Q&A and discussion here following our distinguished 4 speakers and through their presentation. I've asked each of them to prepare 5 slides. Some went over, some went under, and each is allocated about 7 minutes so that we can hopefully have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A and discussion. So with that, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to pass it over to Vijay. He's going to talk a little bit, just reiterate again, our meeting members here, how they can engage and ask questions, and then he'll walk us through each of the panelists, and I look forward to the presentations. Vijay, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'll save time. A simple request to everybody, since this is an important topic, and we have only 55 minutes left. We will come back in a round 2 on this topic in future, but for those who have questions of the speakers, if it's clarifying questions, you don't understand something during the presentation, please raise your hand and we'll flag you in. But if it's a specific question on the content, to please hold till the end. And with that, I'm going to save time by letting the speakers introduce themselves, and we'll go in the order we have on the agenda. So if I'm correct in understanding, Lauren, you may be going first. I'll give it to you, Lauren, please.
All right, thanks, Vijay. And as Alex said, I'm here today in my role for working for the Public Power Council and not with my liaison hat on. And, I'm just really appreciating the opportunity to be part of today's discussion. And I'm happy to lead things off because my presentation is a bit of a bridge between the conversation we were just having on prioritization and workload and roadmap and where we're going to go with discussing RSE failure consequences. So again, trying to stay within my time today. So I'm going to run through this pretty briskly and offer some pretty high level thoughts on why we think that the RSE Phase 3 is important, why we'd like to see that process start soon, and some thoughts on the scope of that discussion. So I'm Lauren Tenney-Dennison. I'm the Director of Market Policy and Grid Strategy at the Public Power Council. For those that aren't familiar with PPC, we represent the interests of 85 publicly owned utilities across 6 states in the Northwest. There are multiple ways that our members are impacted, both by EIM and specifically with the resource efficiency evaluation. That's through BPA's resource participation. All of our members are preference customers of Bonneville and are the primary funders of BPA's resources. The vast majority of our members also reside in EIM balancing authority areas. Many of those are within Bonneville, but there's other EIM participants that we have members in their host BA as well. And then some of our members are direct participants in the EIM themselves. So just a little sense of the different impacts there. If you could move to the next slide. Here, just, probably a really rough summary of the timeline to date, but just wanted to give a sense of, as Alex said, this has been a years-long process to continue to refine and improve the resource evaluation, resource efficiency evaluation. And each of these steps has resulted in real meaningful improvements to the RSE. PPC has really appreciated the commitment that CAISO staff has made to walking through this process, balancing interests throughout these different phases. And one of the benefits of taking this as a phased approach is that there are actually some of the improvements have gone into place as those steps have gone through. And so we've been really appreciative of that. At the same time, the phase process has made it so that there have been outstanding questions at the end of each of these phases. The same was true of phase 2, where we wrapped that up in time to get energy assistance in place for this summer. That's a great outcome, but again, it left some unanswered questions, and I'll talk about those from PPC's perspective in just a minute. I included here the principles that were listed in CAISO's their phase 2 revised final proposal, just for reference. In general, PPC agrees with these principles as a guiding post for the RSE enhancements process. And in looking at and evaluating where the RSE stands to date, when we're talking about the EIM RSE, I think there's some work to go and ways we can continue to improve, particularly on that first bullet about inappropriate leaning, which I would say inappropriate is there's not that compensation for use of capacity through the market. If you could go through the next slide, please. Before I hit on what PPC would like to see in phase 3, I just wanted to touch on the importance of the resource sufficiency evaluation and why we'd like to see that process of phase 3 start soon. So the RSE is a foundational component of ensuring a sense of equity with EIM participation. The EIM is an energy-only market, and through that market, there's not a capacity or compensation for capacity. There's other methods where that compensation happens throughout or outside of the EIM. I have a bullet in here about the inconsistent RA programs, or maybe inconsistent, I should have just said different RA programs throughout the EIM footprint that really cause this need for the RSE. But again, the outcomes of this test impact how entities participate and access the market, how they compensate each other for the supply provided, the resources that are available to market participants. The outcome of this test has impacts today, and that work to continue to refine and go back and answer some of those unanswered questions. Again, we think it's important to start that process soon. Mentioning the RA program piece, for many folks, our members included and BPA included, there's a new momentum and focus on the RA in the Northwest and areas of the Southwest with the creation of WRAP. And with that process starting up and that program getting going, we expect more conversations to be happening on interoperability, things like that that will draw more attention to the RSC as well. I mentioned WRAP, but of course want to acknowledge that others in the footprint are complying with different RA programs, even if they're not, I should say. So the WRAP brings sort of a new perspective to this conversation, but that's not the only RA program that folks are participating in. The last thing I want to note here is the interaction with EDAM. While you might think about this as a tomorrow issue because nobody's participating in EDAM today, entities are actively evaluating and making choices on whether to participate in EDAM, and being able to continue to refine and develop the EIM RSE. This is an important time to be able to do that. You know, there's been strong failure consequences put forth in EDAM, and those could be undermined with some participants. When you think about it, not everybody is going to go to EDAM phase day one. There's going to be some entities that move into that first, and everyone else will still be subject to only the real-time EIM. And even those participating in EDAM, there will be you know, a follow through and flow through to the real-time RSE as well. So you know, while that's a future discussion of starting that process, people are making those evaluations now. You could roll to the next slide. So what would we like to see from PPC's perspective moving into a phase 3? And you'll see things separated out here in a phase 3 bucket and sort of an ongoing bucket. Really wanted to acknowledge with that ongoing bucket that there are a lot of moving pieces, initiatives that are still going on that will impact how the RSE relates to other parts of the market. The ongoing reporting that's been going on from DMM has been super helpful. We've really appreciated that, that implementation piece, and there are probably a lot more discussions to come from things that are observed there. But what can we look at and should be talked about in a near-term phase 3? You know, one of the things that I'll bring up here that PPC has raised from the very beginning of this process is concerns with the current failure consequences that just result in inequitable outcomes. And when I talk about current failure consequences, I'm not talking about the energy assistance that was adopted in phase 2, but the long-standing, if you fail the flex ramp test, you're limited at your last intervals, imports, exports. You know, especially when we look at the import perspective, for entities that import lots of megawatts usually and regularly, you know, they could fail and still be able to use hundreds of megawatts coming from the EIM in subsequent hours. For an entity that usually exports or maybe imports small amounts, they fail and they're essentially cut off. Now, totally understand why he wouldn't want to move to a failure consequence that is dropping off somebody who's, you know, in the prior interval had a couple hundred megawatts coming in from the EIM and just cut that off. But what are some ways that we could, alternate ways that we could phase out the existing failure consequences and move to things that are more equitable? You know, are there ways to build on the success of the assistance energy, maybe tweak that format a little bit so that it gets broad support and could be, you know, more support for a mandatory application? Or, you know, I think another alternative that would be really good is if entities opt out of energy assistance, they can do so to the impact or to the effect that they have other resources that are available to them, whether it's reserves that they have, reserves sharing groups. Basically, they can opt out if they don't plan to use capacity from the EIM in subsequent hours. So what are some of the tweaks there? For the sake of time, I'll just mention these other things very quickly. More discussion about the in-market pricing, continued evaluation of consistent application in the RSE, and again, understanding that interplay with EDAM. So those are things we'd really like to see. I understand some of the speakers are going to touch on those points, and so I'm very much looking forward to hearing more of that discussion.
Thank you, Lauren. That was really good. Love this comparative way of presenting. Does anybody have any strong urges of clarifying questions, or we can move to the next speaker, please? Okay, hearing none or not seeing hands raised. Let's move to our next speaker, please. And I thought that was Bonnie. Am I correct in the roster?
Yep.
Yep.
So
Please take it away.
Great, thank you. My name is Bonnie Blair. I am a partner with the law firm of Thompson Coburn LLP. I represent the Six Cities group, which consists of the cities of Anaheim, Azusa, Banning, Colton, Pasadena, and Riverside, California. Those cities are all participating transmission owners and are members of the PTO sector. They are also all load serving entities for retail customers within California. There's a little disclaimer at the bottom of my cover slide that says the views that I'm expressing haven't been endorsed by the Six Cities, but I bring the perspective of many years of representing them in market design initiatives of both transmission owners and LSEs. Next slide, please. I have a different approach to suggest than Lauren suggested. I believe that we should have some very focused near-term activities. The first one is to identify any inconsistencies that may exist between the WEIM RSE as modified by the Phase 2 enhancements and the EDAM RSE. That will be very important to facilitate the effective implementation of EDAM, and so that I believe should happen soon. The second thing that I believe should happen soon is stakeholder engagement to build consensus on the purposes and objectives of RSE tests and also guiding principles for RSE formulation and evaluation. I thought about whether that step should be deferred until later, as I'm recommending deferral of other potential enhancements to RSE, but it occurred to me that building that consensus, coming to a sort of a shared understanding of the objectives of RSE will help to guide the review of ongoing experience, which is the third point that I believe should begin now and carry forward until after EDAM is implemented. Relative to the roadmap that Jillian presented earlier, I'd suggest that items 1 and 2 should take place earlier than indicated in the roadmap. Item 3 would be an ongoing process. But next slide, please. I would suggest that we defer any consideration of broad-based reform to the RSE tests for 1 to 2 years following implementation of EDAM. I think that deferral will give us time to gain experience with a new method for calculating load uncertainty, which the CAISO is rolling out, I think, this month. It will give us time to gain experience with the impact of the Phase 2 enhancements that were just recently approved. And it will give us time to gain experience with RSE performance under EDAM. Next slide, please. I suggest that it is not appropriate to consider development of in-market consequences for failure of the RSE tests at this point in time, because there appear to be potential errors in the identification of failures, and in-market consequences would not allow for analysis of failures or identification of errors prior to the consequences having potentially substantial impacts. In addition, I think the differences in standard in resource counting, in other words, what counts toward the RSE tests, could lead to inequitable and or inefficient imposition of in-market consequences. And one example is the treatment of demand response programs, which is not uniform for all participants in the EIM and potentially participants in EDAM. So next slide, please. Here's my contact information. In sum, I think we should start now to do our best to confirm that the EIM and EDAM RSE tests are consistent. Work to develop a consensus on the purpose and objectives of the RSE tests in order to guide the monitoring and future modifications. Third, continue to monitor and collect data, but I would defer broad-based or consideration of broad-based revisions to the framework for the RSE tests. And my point there is really to avoid a set of serial do-overs. I think it's important to see how the tests, as we have framed them at this point, work, and then with the guidance of an overall consensus on what we're trying to achieve, think about modifications after we see how they work. That's all I have at the moment.
Bonnie, thank you. Very thoughtful and provocative in a way. It's good to have a different perspective. Appreciate it. Very thoughtful slides. Let's go to our next speaker, which is our RIF liaison colleague, Lindsay Shuckaway with Nevada Energy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Schluckaway, and these comments are from NV Energy's perspective and not from the EIM entity sector, my liaison role. So I'm speaking on behalf of NV Energy. We could go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thank you. So first, we wanted to develop a few principles that we thought would be important for phase 3, at least considering that in-market financial consequences. So the first one that we thought was very important was that the in-market financial consequences should not be punitive during non-stress system conditions, result in excessive penalties for small failures, and should be tiered based on the size of the resource sufficiency failure. In thinking about our principles and specifically that non-stress system condition point, that was something that was mentioned by both the MSC and the market expert. And so that was something that we took into consideration and definitely think need to be brought out in the market design for phase 3. For the second principle, we thought that the design should include a mechanism to address potential leaning on the market to encourage forward procurement. And we also thought that a balancing authority area that is unable to meet the minimum requirement for contingency reserves and may be in the position to curtail load, meaning they're in an EA3, should not pass the resource sufficiency test. This is something that continuously sort of happens occasionally, and so we were questioning why that occurs, and definitely think that that is a situation where a balancing authority area would not be resource sufficient. So that's something that we think would be important to address in phase 3. And then finally, we think that it would be important to that downward resource sufficiency failure consequences should not exist, or at least we should take a step back and really think about why we're testing for downward resource sufficiency and whether or not it's harming or reducing the amount of benefits in the market based on the footprint and the access to that additional generation that could result. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in addressing the non-stress system condition, we think that the initiative should first define a non-stress system condition, and this should be something that should be in agreement with stakeholder input. And so we've kind of identified a few metrics that we think could help the initial proposal of what could potentially define a non-stress system condition. So we're thinking you could use the RTPD prices for determining when the system is not stressed, or you could use the flex ramping product demand curve, kind of where the demand curve is on the prices to determine if, if you're at the top of the demand curve, then you might be in a stress system condition. We were additionally thinking you could look at the megawatt amount of dispatchable energy or the measured surplus from capacity or flexible ramping sufficiency test. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So we wanted to also propose a few penalty bands for this in-market financial consequence. We definitely agree with both the MSC and the market experts that stepped penalty bands would be appropriate. And so we wanted to take an initial stab at kind of what we were thinking that might look like. The resource, one thing we wanted to say is that the resource efficiency test is very complicated, it's precise, but it is also highly inaccurate, kind of to what Bonnie was alluding to. So we were thinking the test, and also that test is conducted hourly right before the time, so there's right before the hour, and so there's little time to react. And so we thought that it was important that you shouldn't really penalize anybody if they're within that forecast error or MAPE because of these facts, because it's tested right before the hour and there's little time to react. So within that band, we were thinking that no penalty should apply. And then we have proposed additional steps within the uncertainty portion of the flexible ramping test, with the last step being a failure that an EIM entity does not have enough supply to meet the forecasted load. And for that one, we believe the prices should be at the applicable bid cap. And we also, I wanted to note here that we included the incremental transfers because no one should be penalized if uncertainty or load does not materialize. So that means that if the financial penalty would only occur when an entity imported more than the defined import threshold. So there would be, we're thinking that there would be some sort of defined threshold, and if you import above that, then you would actually see the in-market penalties, and that would be the LMP plus the penalty from the tier above, kind of based off of where you failed. Looks like I might be getting into time, so I'll try to go a little faster. The other thing that you can notice from the slide is that there is no uncertainty included in capacity test failure penalty band, and that's just because there's no uncertainty. So we tried to devise steps based on those two tests. So we could go ahead and move on to the next slide, and I'll try to wrap things up pretty quickly. So in the mechanism to address leaning, first, we believe the initiative should define what leaning is and also take in stakeholder input when defining that leaning, and then also to develop some sort of tiered penalty mechanism. It's important to note that EDAM did design something like this, so I do think it's possible that we could reach an additional mechanism for the EIM to address leaning, and we proposed here just a few high-level metrics on how you could do that. But I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, the final slide. So in here, this again, we do not believe that in emergency events that might trigger a load shedding event we believe that it should be reported to the market, and we think that a use of an operational flag could be used in BAOP. And this way, if the operator flipped the flag, it would automatically trigger scarcity prices and result in an automatic failure for the resource efficiency test and put you at an automatic forecasted load penalty band. So that's kind of our proposal for that, to kind of get away from the fact that there are sometimes instances where someone is failing in an EA or is in an EA3 and is still passing the resource efficiency test. This would be at least a mechanism to kind of capture that maybe they shouldn't be, they probably need higher prices so that they could get the energy. And that was just something we thought might be important to address for phase 3 and our proposal to address it. And that's all I have, and I'm sorry if I went over on my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Do you want me to catch it, or did you want to transition? Sorry, there's this pause.
Oh, thank you. We'll give it to you, Kathleen. Welcome to take over, and the final speaker for this session, and we'll then follow up a discussion.
Okay, sounds good. Just trying to move to the quick clip based on our time. Thanks so much. So let's go to the next slide. I'm Kathleen from Vistra. I am speaking on behalf of Vistra, not as my role as a liaison, just want to caveat. So I have a lot of words and slides. I will also try and go quickly. At the highest level, what is the resource efficiency evaluation and what is leaning? RSE is a set of different tests that is meant to test and identify whether there is a risk that areas may be leaning on other areas or even the resources within. Historically, in WEIM, the need to mitigate against leaning was to limit the entity's consuming capacity at no charge. And I know under normal conditions, it was designed really to operate during normal conditions. The concept being that outside of normal conditions, energy imbalance market is likely, that's why there's a lot of functions to isolate, separate. So a lot of it was normal condition. Frankly, we just avoid what is leaning if we're going to facilitate operations through stress conditions has not been fully discussed or developed. We would put out there that leaning during that period probably is defined something like relying on transfers for energy to avoid entering or to ride through shortages at a charge lower than that emergency energy's value, or relying on a service without paying a charge for it, is a reasonable definition of leaning during these periods. The RSE tests for sufficient supply resources from utility operated and third-party operated owners and operators that bid in that capacity, and is testing to see if there's sufficient resources in the 15-minute market. And these resources, it doesn't matter whether they're forward contracted or not. The test is to see if the bid-in capacity, whether it's from utility owned or third party, can meet expected real-time demand plus uncertainty. I want to emphasize this is not a test on RA. This is not resource adequacy, and it's not intended to be. And if you read the record, you will see that FERC adopted this rule on the basis that the collective resource adequacy obligations across the West were sufficient to protect against the leaning concerns going into real time. And this is a check to make sure that leaning is not being facilitated through the market. Let's go to the next slide. This is status quo, and this is reference. I'm not going to go over this. I'm going to assume that everyone who's participating today knows what the 3 tests are, knows what they're testing, and knows what the failures are, but this is an easy reference guide. If you want to look at this slide and pull it up on your computer as I talk through it as we have our discussion. Next slide. What I want to spend time on is delving into the data. What's the data that we've been receiving on this subject? Both CAISO's Market Analysis and Forecasting Group and the Department of Market Monitoring has been doing a fantastic job making information available to stakeholders for us to evaluate how the RSE is functioning. CAISO and DMM reports show that CAISO passed the capacity test under both EEA2 and EEA3 conditions during the September heat wave. Almost all of my data is going to be during that heat wave, by the way. I should premise that. But if you look at these charts, chart on the left is from, top left is from Market Analysis, and it shows the time on September 6th across all 24 hours, the test failures. If you look, what I've highlighted in red is just to try to emphasize that entire period was experiencing EEA1, EEA2, EEA3s, and the green bars that you see behind this are when there were test failures. The majority of the time that they were in shortage conditions, emergency conditions, they were not failing these tests. If you look down in the bottom right, you'll see DMM's chart. DMM showed specifically on September 6th, again, for a period of hours during the day. They did a zoom in version of this, where you can see which periods were under EEA2, EEA3, and EEA2. The two circles you see there are the only two intervals that the CAISO failed during this entire period that they were under emergency conditions. A couple questions to think about is the overlay of energy emergency actions pass or fail rate was, this was only reported for CAISO, but there is a belief that there may have been EEAs called around the West. I didn't pull this data, but it would be great if we could have a better transparency into that. But let's assume this is not just a CAISO issue, it occurred multiple places. The other thing is considering a capacity test for being able to meet energy requirements. It's odd that you're passing when you have identified through your operator action you are not meeting your energy requirements. Go to the next slide. I'm going to break this down for those who don't nerd out on EEAs or any emergency actions the way that I do. Current codes on the far left, what this means, and what I think this means from when you compare it to a capacity test. So I'm going to zoom in on the box that I've highlighted here because all of the instances before are leading up to not being able to meet your energy requirements. EEA2 is defined as all available resources are in use, and the BAA will no longer be able to meet expected energy requirements, but still need to meet contingency. EEA3, unable to meet both. I'd say the one nuance to what I just saw Lindsay present is that we believe EEA2 also does not meet the intent of the RSE, which is testing for meeting energy requirements. So we would say both EEA2 and EEA3 fall into that category. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about another piece of data. DMM and CAISO reports also show that at least within CAISO, EIM BA failure consequences just aren't binding. I think the premise of what we think is an important issue that needs to be discussed in this future initiative is if a consequence that we think exists is not a binding consequence, is it a consequence? Have you paid a charge for that capacity as intended? Does it have any practical impact? And lack of practical consequences may unwind the resource efficiency evaluation check on leaning, and this merits more discussion. What the data shows, if we look at the top left, I flipped them, so let's look DMMs first. September 5th and 6th, all hours, the net WEIM import in light blue, net WEIM import for 15-minute market in light blue. Dark blue is in for the 5-minute market. Your import limit or the test consequence. So what was the net import transfer limit applied after failure? You can see with these little yellow bars. DMM provided this chart with the ability to see the EEAs as well, EEA2 and EEA3. If you notice where the net import limit was, it didn't have a practical impact on the net import transfers coming into the CAISO area, as they were systemically and persistently much lower. You see the same data supported by the CAISO's market analysis group on the bottom right chart. The bars that are equivalent to this are these red bars that you'll see in that band that looks orange. The red bars are the transfer limits relative to the real-time, the RTD or the 5-minute market transfer, which is in this blue area of the blue lines with the area under the curve. You see here, you'll see it is systemically, persistently below, and that these limits were not binding. Next chart, next page. The other thing, let's expand beyond CAISO, because I want to ensure that we're looking at this from a system-wide basis. Those charts are just very clear and helpful, but we see this trend across the WEIM. The DMM report shows that there were non-binding RSE limits in multiple areas. CAISO, LADWP, Public Service Colorado, New Mexico, Public Service Company of New Mexico, I don't know I can buy this, Seattle City Light, all had 100% of their failures that occurred result in intervals with non-binding limits on their net transfers. And you can see that if you look at this chart below. If you look at the market transfers below the imposed limit and the percent of failures, the ones that have 100%, every single failure consequence occurred where their actual transfers were below that limit. The box on the far right is showing where they were at that limit. So these were binding. But for these areas, they were not binding. But it's important that only CAISO on average net imported where the resource deficiency evaluation failure consequence appears to have no practical impact to mitigate leaning. The rest of these areas with non-binding limits were net exporting. So the point we're trying to make here is that there is this question of what is the consequence? Is it having a practical impact on market results or not? Next slide. I'm not going to read through these, but I would use them. They're also for reference. These are some salient quotes that I found interesting in the DMM and market analysis reports to kind of get into the fact that the driver behind these non-binding consequences appear to be the load bias in the 15-minute market. Next slide and final slide. CAISO and DMM reports showed that the 15-minute market loads were systemically higher than the 5-minute market net transfers. If you look at the top left, you'll see DMM's chart, CAISO imbalance conformance adjustments on September 5th and 6th. You can see the magnitude of these. There's green and yellow, which are mapped fairly well. They're the hour ahead forecast, hour ahead bias, the 15-minute market bias or conformance, and then the 5-minute market down in red. And you can see that the difference is between 5,000 megawatt bias versus like a 2,000 megawatt bias for the 5-minute market, a significantly different amount. On the bottom right, this is from market analysis, shows similar information, but it also includes RUC. So the RUC conformance, the hour ahead, the 15-minute market, and the real-time dispatch run. You'll see that the RTD is in this light blue, again, very low relative to the green, the darker green, which is the 15-minute market. This persistent difference is having an impact on the limits, and those quotes that I didn't read will give you some more insight into why. What we want to put forward is that a really important issue that RSE Phase 3 we believe should tackle is we need to re-examine the role of the load bias or load conformance in the framework. Couple ideas. Maybe biases should be removed from the physical consequence amount. So this threshold that I heard Lindsay talk about, what is the right threshold? Maybe bias shouldn't be in that threshold. Another question that we have is, maybe we should consider moving to a financial consequence, especially as the consequence level, this threshold, is becoming more appropriately tuned to what would be a real consequence to disincent leaning. The stricter that consequence becomes, the more limiting it might be. I heard Lauren kind of mention that for some areas that have a tight tolerance for consequence. And so financial consequences start to look like something that might be better supported. With that, I will stop, open up for discussion. This is some of the data I wanted to provide. Thank you.
Lindsay, very helpful. And sorry, Kathleen, thank you as well. As we expected, your closing it out will unravel a lot of detailed nuggets. So thank you for that. I'm going to give it back to Alex in a way to help facilitate with me the questions. Before Alex or others may have any specific reactions, does anybody have any questions of any of the speakers from the RIF liaisons especially? Okay, Alex, I'll give it to you how we want to do this. My suggestion would be we quickly take any reactions or thoughts from the liaisons first, and then we can quickly entertain some questions from the audience as well, the group, the larger group. Thank you. And Kathleen, thank you.
Yes, Vijay, thank you. I think that's the appropriate way to go here. We've got about 15 minutes left. We want to respect everybody's time and close this thing up. So let's open it up, if we could, just given the work that the liaisons have put together in getting this meeting going. Let's see if there's any show of hands, if there's any questions from the liaisons, and then we'll open it up to the broader audience, liaisons.
I actually have a comment to make, if I may, after I've been quietly trying to read all the slides. I think there's a very clear realization that leaning can happen, is happening, and there's differences of views between Bonnie and to some degree a little bit from Lauren, but then I really would like to better appreciate this in-market concept of treatment at a higher level for those who are new on the call. Let's please educate people on the call about what is in-market treatment if you had to do. But overall, I really like the stuff here. Thank you.
Yeah, Vijay, you were stealing my thunder there a little bit. I was going to hopefully to raise this up a little bit to level, just to your point about we've talked about quite a bit about resource efficiency and what leaning is. I have a question for Lindsay because she really highlighted the notion of an in-market solution, and there's been some discussion about an out-of-market solution. My understanding is that exactly given the complexity of the resource sufficiency evaluation, there's a bit of the solution or the proposal as it currently stands is there's going to be somewhat of if you opt in, there's going to be somewhat of an autopsy that's done after the fact to kind of see, okay, you've opted in, you would have failed it, you did indeed continue to receive imports above the threshold that you otherwise would have been barred to exceed, and then there's a settlement of fees or penalties after the fact. So I view that as an out-of-market solution. Are you proposing that happens within the market run and it helps establish the prices, the dynamic pricing?
Yes. So yeah, you're correct. So the initiative phase 2 that just went through and that will be implemented June 1. Correct. It is an out-of-market solution. And so CAISO had stated that for phase 3, they wanted to consider an in-market solution. So that's what we were proposing here, is that the penalty prices would be included and added to the LNP, and that the market would see those prices if you failed the sufficiency test and you were also importing beyond whatever defined threshold the initiative comes up with. That was our proposal.
Great, thank you. And I've got one more for you, Lindsay. One of your slides there, I wasn't sure whether you were advocating that the resource sufficiency downward test should be eliminated, or that this assistance energy should not be available for those who failed the resource sufficiency downward test in phase 3, if that was something that was going to be a topic of discussion.
Yes. So for that one, we were suggesting that it should be eliminated, or at least we need to take a step back and really look at what are we testing for the downward test? Is it really necessary and needed? And we really need to consider the benefits that we're foregoing by having a downward sufficiency test.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see that we have a question in the chat for Kathleen. I don't know whether Kathleen can see that or whether we need to, you can see it, Kathleen? Why don't you go ahead and give that a shot?
Sure, and I'll just read it quickly. Given the relationship between the bias and the appearance of inaccuracy in the test, do you see this issue improving substantially with the implementation of the DAME initiative? And as such, do you recommend these solutions be considered as interim? That's a great question. It's from Sybil from Public Generating Pool. Thank you so much, Sybil. I think that the use and the magnitude of bias might change systemically in most periods as a result of DAME. What I tried to stress, and I think what Lindsay, and I won't speak for you, Lindsay, but if you can correct me if you're stressing this as well, normal conditions versus stress conditions just operate very differently. The bias that we see in the charts I showed are not normal bias differences between 15-minute and 5-minute. I think that there are issues that may be happening with this systemic difference across the board, but at a much smaller level. So I do think DAME will help to smooth out any issues that are in a normal period. But what I'm showing is a bias done for energy scarcity, which was very different than a flexibility concern by the operators during this time period. Do any other panelists, just to point to Lindsay, Bonnie, or Lauren, does that resonate with you that we're kind of focused on stress versus normal?
Yeah, we were thinking that stress system conditions, you'd probably have to define something additional or something different. It would be something that needs to be looked at, and that's why you needed to define a non-stress system conditions and what should occur during those. Yeah.
I think that's part of the discussion about what are we doing here? What is it? What are we trying to accomplish? What problems are we trying to solve? What principles should guide the resolution?
I have a question for Bonnie if no one else has a follow-up on the earlier matter. Okay. And of course, Kathleen or Lindsay can also chime in. But Bonnie, you have something that's a little personally of interest to me, and I've been very intrigued. During the 2020 heat storm events in California, if I remember correctly, over 6,000 megawatts of demand response economic DR played a role in preventing a bigger crisis on August 16, to be precise. I was curious what you bring in your slide number 4 is a lack of consistency of standardization and resource counting, example DR programs. Can you shed a little more light on that, and or what could CalISO's staff be doing differently? Thank you.
Sure, I can try. Whoops. Okay, yeah, I'm still on. Yeah, so for example, California has something that they call RDRR, which is Reliability Demand Response Resources. And those are only by design, by the design of the product, if I understand correctly, they're only activated when the CAISO is either in or approaching an emergency condition under NERC rules. So they're there, they're designed to maintain reliability. But then if you say, well, if you're in an emergency condition, you automatically fail the RSE, you're completely discounting that resource.
Got it.
But it's a real resource. And in other BAAs, there are demand response programs that are activated, on relatively short notice, and those get to count for RSE purposes. So there's still a lot of flexibility among all of the BAAs in terms of what resources count for passing the RSE test, and how do we define them, and what requirements apply to them. And that's one of the problems I have with undertaking, kind of a deep dive right now into failure consequences if we've got such differences among the BAAs in terms of how we're counting the resources.
Thank you. Very, very, very helpful response. I'll get back. I think Alex, you indicated we have a question from Pacific Corp. Please feel free to speak your question out if you like, Nadia. Okay. Pacific Corp would like to bring up an issue that we would like to see in scope of the phase 3. Would it today be appropriate to bring to the wider group or another RIF meeting? Nadia, why don't you please raise your issue so it comes to the attention today? And then I think this group will be definitely in 2023 planning another RIF agenda item where RSE could be brought up at the right time again. But if you can flag it, what you're thinking, that'd be great, please.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can't hear you. Louder, please.
Oh. Does that sound better? Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So my name is Nadia Ward. I'm an organized markets analyst with Pacific Corp. So the issue we want to talk about today is that as a result of the phase 2 WEIM RC initiative, the CAISO is now requiring all low priority transfer exports to be tagged as firm provisional with the GFP for the generator product, and also put in a text string within the miscellaneous information on the tag. So today I wanted to specifically talk about the day ahead text string that reads the following. Day ahead hourly block export schedules not backed by generation from non-resource adequacy capacity that also cleared HASP in our protected schedules. So I think we can agree that this adds in a needless complication for the tagging process. If this text string is not added to differentiate low priority transfers from the day ahead time frame versus the real-time time frame, then the CAISO will default all day ahead low priority transfer schedules as a result of the real-time HASP optimization process instead of an awarded day ahead schedule. So to be clear, Pacific Corp is supportive of providing BAAs better visibility regarding the firmness of these exports. However, the repercussion of adding in the text string to day-ahead schedules is that the CAISO would not add in day-ahead low priority transfer schedules to their overall RSC obligation come the WEIM. So before my current position, I came from scheduling, and from experience, the chances of fat fingering or simply even leaving off the text string altogether could happen more often than none. So therefore, Pacific Corp views this change as an overall market inefficiency. We filed comments regarding this matter and didn't see it addressed, so we wanted to bring this up to the attention of the RIF participants and would like to see it in the scope of the WEIM RSC Phase 3. Since the CAISO needs a mechanism to differentiate low priority transfer schedules, we propose to simply put GFP1, GFP2, and GFP3 to signal the different criteria outlined in the CAISO's tariff. We view this as a more streamlined approach that accomplishes the goal of the Phase 2 initiative. So thank you. That's all I wanted to bring up today. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia. Just for the record, you could, if you don't mind, please emailing this to your sector liaisons,
sure.
but they can bring it into the record more efficiently. We have a question. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Let's go to Don Trethewey, and then Alex, I'll give it back to you.
Hi, this is Don Trethewey from GDS Associates. Are you able to hear me? Mm-hmm. So I think it'd be really important for everyone to sort of take a step back and really think about what the resource efficiency evaluation is supposed to be doing. It's definitely, its intent has definitely changed from the original EIM design. Under the original EIM design, the reason that RSE was even developed was the fact that there wasn't a must-offer obligation for the EIM entity, yet there was a must-offer obligation for CAISO resource adequacy resources. So it was a way to sort of be a proxy for a must-offer obligation to determine just a minimum level of participation so that you can then benefit from all the economic trade. So it was trying to come up with just the minimum amount that you need to participate with. It has evolved consistently since the start of the EIM, but it's gotten to a point now where having discussions such as, we need to figure out if there's correct capacity compensation. We're talking about an energy imbalance market here. We're not talking about a capacity market. If we're talking about in-market financial penalties, I think we're starting to now move into the realm of scarcity pricing. The proposal Lindsay put forward looks very much like an operating reserve demand curve to me, which is basically how you would implement scarcity pricing. So I really would think it would be beneficial to figure out what exactly the RSC is trying to is to prevent, and leaning, obviously based on these discussions, has multiple meanings to multiple different people. And if you really want a true test to see if people have sufficient capacity, then the current tests are probably not accurately designed to do that. If they're there to simply test to make sure that you've got a minimum level of participation, and by participation, it's just simply bids. Do you have enough bids in the market? Then these tests probably make sense, and you should try to simplify them as much as possible so that people don't try to aren't worried they're going to pass by 1 megawatt. They should easily pass, because that's how you actually get all the benefits out of the EIM is through that trade.
Absolutely, Don. Thank you for that perspective. And I'm sorry to say that we are out of time. This initiative is going to keep on giving. The Cal ISO is dedicated. They've recognized and have emphasized the need to work on a Phase 3. So this is going to be high on the RIFs, I imagine, on our RIFs to-do list to continue to monitor and support our sectors in ensuring that this resource efficiency adjustments, continue to receive stakeholder comment and, come to the best solution that we possibly can, given the differing views and how complicated this can be at times. But with that, I want to thank once again, all of our panelists. So I got to give a special shout out for Bonnie for raising her hand to come here and present some slides and really present somewhat of a more cautious approach and view relative to some of the other views that were shared by the panelists. So it's always great to have a balanced perspective of things. So thank you for bringing that. With that, Josh, I'm going to hand it back to you and let you close things down.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in the meeting and the call today. This is the first of, at a minimum, 3 meetings throughout the year. We'll be working on scheduling our next meeting, which most likely will be in person, associated with one of the upcoming governing body meetings. So with that, have a great afternoon and be on the lookout for a market notice associated with our next meeting. Appreciate it all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.